1997's Annabelles Wish is an animated kids movie that seems to be trying to cut its cloth from the same material that gave us the likes of Nick and Noel, The Bears Who Saved Christmas, and Dot and Spot's Magical Christmas Adventure. Only here, it appears that there was at least a modest attempt to throw some serious money at the concept, which makes it such a shame that despite what good is here, there's a lot of mediocrity and mixed messages on display. The film is narrator-driven as we open on a snow-covered mountainside as Santa is rallying his reindeer and crew to help on the long and perilous journey to deliver presents across the world to all. It's Christmas Eve, and in a barn in Tennessee, a cow called Star has just given birth to Annabelle, a tiny calf with a heart as big as an overly large melon-shaped head. And almost as quickly, we're then introduced to Billy, a young boy who desperately needs a calf in his life, apparently. Billy is mute. He's been mute ever since a tragic barn fire he got caught up in, which may or may not have killed his parents. The film is very non-committal on that plot point. It's implied but never outright said. And, with his parents out of the picture, Billy lives with his grandpa, affectionately known as Gramps. Billy's out caroling with his best friend Emily, a girl who seemingly knows Billy so well that despite him being unable to talk, she always knows exactly what he wants. Bit creepy, but alright. Anyway, after some time caroling, two bullies turn up and pick on Billy for not being able to speak, causing Emily to jump to Billy's defence, shortly followed by Gramps getting involved. After words are exchanged, the bully's father, Gus, comes out. Gus is a miserly Scrooge of a man who's all but lost his Christmas spirit and doesn't want his kids getting involved in all of that. Gramps tries to reason with Gus, but Gus cuts the conversation short and heads home. It's at this point that Gramps discovers that Annabelle's been born, in a somewhat nothing of a scene that basically only serves to introduce us to all the barnyard animals we'll be getting to know a bit better as the film goes on. Then we're introduced to Aunt Agnes, a city-slicking lady about town who doesn't really care about anyone or anything other than her own bottom line. Agnes is rich, she can buy what she wants when she wants. And while she has all the elements of a top-shelf Christmas and a luxury skyline apartment, she's missing something.
A child. No.
Don't get me wrong, she's not actually interested in having a kid to raise, nurture or develop. She just wants a kid almost as an accessory, a way to help make her Christmas look complete in terms of optics. And she's been working with lawyers for a while now to try and procure Billy as a legal ward so that she can have that visually perfect Christmas. And it's at this point that we're introduced to our core mechanism of this film. You see, each Christmas, Santa doesn't just deliver presents to all the people of the world who've behaved. For 24 hours between Christmas Eve and Boxing Day, Santa grants all the animals in the world the ability to talk. He does this by covering them in a magic powder before taking some time to catch up with them and then flying off, leaving them to go about their business until it wears off. And, within hours of being born, Annabelle is granted the ability to speak. And she uses her first opportunity to speak to Santa to basically ask what the creatures are who are pulling his sleigh. And when he explains what reindeer are, she says she wants to fly like the reindeer. And that's about it. Seriously, shortly after Santa leaves, that's all Annabelle can talk about is how she wants to ask Santa next year if he can give her the ability to fly. The next day, Billy goes downstairs to open his Christmas presents, where he finds a present buried in his Christmas tree from Santa, telling him to go to the barn. When he gets there, Annabelle is waiting for him and Billy is overjoyed. However, when Billy sneezes, Annabelle, who's unaware that animals can't always talk, blesses Billy's sneeze, which freaks Billy out while the animals are all like, "Ah, crap, the calf's ruined a 2 millennia long sweet deal." While Billy steps away for a minute to get his head together, Annabelle's mum explains to Annabelle why Billy can't talk, and when Billy comes back, he makes some makeshift antlers for Annabelle and the pair head out to go on a sleigh ride together with Emily. Due to slippery conditions, Annabelle accidentally ends up running through a fence owned by Gus, who at first doesn't seem all that bothered. However, he decides to use the opportunity to fleece some stuff from Gramps. So, the next day he heads over to Gramps' house and tells him he wants Annabelle in exchange for the fence damage. The town sheriff basically shrugs and says he can do what he wants, which, is that how America works? Leave a comment. If so, I'm very concerned for you guys. Anyway, Gus takes Annabelle, and in order to get her back, Gramps has to sell a music box that has tremendous sentimental value to him, as it was previously owned by his daughter. He pays off Gus and gets Annabelle back for Billy, and then what follows is an overly long musical number. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, this film also has a few musical numbers worked in which we see a year go by for Annabelle and Billy. Obviously, Annabelle can't talk anymore as the magic wore off on Boxing Day, but the emphasis is on the fact that over that year a bond has been built between the two. And, as if by magic, Christmas is upon the town once again. And, like clockwork, the bullies are back again to cause trouble for Billy. This time though, Annabelle headbutts one of the bullies, and the pair run home to tell their dad that Billy's crazy wild animal savaged them without provocation. Gus calls the sheriff again, who ends up telling Gus that he has a witness who can prove his kids made up the attack, before having a heart-to-heart and telling Gus about how Gramps pawned his daughter's music box to pay Gus off. He tells him to change his ways or end up a miser, leading to Gus re-evaluating his life choices. And from here, we're going to have to get into spoiler territory, not only because we're approaching the last 10 minutes of the film, but also because there is a lot to unpack. So, it's Christmas Eve and Aunt Agnes has rocked up to the house with a court injunction allowing her to take Billy with her until such a time that Billy is able to speak again. She's pretty ruthless about it, but the animals manage to push her car into the river, which means she's stranded there until Christmas morning at the earliest. That night, Santa comes back to the barn and gives the animals the talkie-talk powder, and Annabelle plucks up the courage to ask Santa for a super secret special wish. Santa listens intently, and we then cut to the next day. Agnes is gearing up to take Billy away when Billy spots a present in the tree like the year before. The box appears empty until Billy tips it up, at which point a load of magic talkie-talk powder lands on him and he suddenly regains the ability to speak. He tells her he wants to stay with Gramps. Gramps rips up the court injunction and Agnes is defeated. While on the way out of the house, she bumps into Gus, who's arrived at Gramps' house to deliver a gift. The music box that Gramps pawned. It appears he's had a Christmas change of heart, and while Gramps is getting a bit emotional, Agnes and Gus hit it off, and the narrator explains that they eventually got together, giving Agnes the kids she wanted to accessorize and Gus the family dynamic and cash that offers him stability and city living. Now, this is where the film gets a bit... whoa. And this really is the only distinctive part of this Christmas special. Because, whoa. So, Billy heads to the barn to tell Annabelle the good news about him getting his voice back. Unfortunately, Annabelle can only moo at him, and it's then explained by the other animals that Annabelle asked Santa to give her talkie-talk powder to Billy instead of her, because she wanted Billy to be able to talk again. Now, why is this problematic, you ask? Well, two reasons. Firstly, Annabelle only gets the ability to talk for 1 day of every year she's alive. Cows have an average life expectancy of 15 to 20 years, and as we'll see shortly, Billy's ability to talk is permanent, for life. So, why Billy is able to talk for life when realistically he should only be able to do so for roughly 15 to 20 days is a bit of a loss on me. But this then raises another issue. You see, the correct way that this Christmas special should have ended is that Santa comes back having acknowledged that Annabelle acted selflessly, given that she's only 1 year old at this point, and gives her the ability to talk once a year regardless of the deal she made, because he's such a jolly nice man, and so that her and Billy can have secret conversations and mad bants for the rest of their living lives. No! Instead, at this point, we then flash forward about 15 years. Billy is now in his late 20s, early 30s, Annabelle is a mute old lady, and everyone is dead. No Gramps, no Star, all the other barnyard animals have perished or gone to slaughter. Gus and the bullies moved to the city and Billy married Emily, leaving Annabelle a lonely mute, seeing out the rest of her days in a cold barn, more or less alone, with only Billy for occasional company. Billy goes to see Annabelle every Christmas Eve to see if she can talk. She never can, and on the occasion that we pick things up, Annabelle is set to die. Billy comments multiple times about Annabelle's health, about how she might not see another Christmas, and she just looks so frail in this final scene. Anyway, without anyone noticing, Annabelle leaves the barn and heads into the mountains. Billy realises she's missing and heads out after her, eventually finding her on the brink of fucking death near a pond. And from here on in, you can either choose to believe one of two things. Either Santa turns up, tells Annabelle that she's been a great animal, and then transitions her from a cow into a young and disturbingly hot reindeer who then leads Santa's sleigh off into the midnight air, or Annabelle dies on that mountainside and the whole bit with Santa is a figment of her imagination generated by the slow struggled death throes that oxygen starvation has on the brain. Merry Christmas! And that's how the film ends. This film was marketed at kids aged 5 to 10 years old, and it left me utterly depressed, cold, and confused about what I'd actually just sat through. For starters, as mentioned, there's just way too much going on. In the first 15 minutes, we effectively have at least 3 main plots dropped on us. Not only do we have Annabelle's wish to fly itself acting as the driving force, but you have Gus's Scrooge plot, Agnes's attempts at stealing Billy, Billy's lost voice, the relationship between Billy and Annabelle, Grandpa's mourning at the loss of his daughter, not to mention the bullies, or Billy's tentative relationship with Emily, or even Billy's parents' demise. There's just way too much going on in this film. Any of these plots would have generally been an entire Christmas film in and of itself, but doing them all at once creates something that's simultaneously utterly breakneck and requiring full unwavering attention, while also failing to really deliver on any of the plot lines it sets up in a satisfying or enjoyable way. Oh, don't get me wrong, all of the plot lines do more or less get resolved, but it's all just way too much. And the rules that this film's world runs on are just awful. This film has got to have the worst Santa that I've ever seen. Apart from the fact that this movie's Santa is a bit on the slimmer side and basically just looks like a dude bro in a Santa outfit, Santa is supposed to be an all-forgiving, border messianic figure. If you're writing a Christmas film where Santa's involved, you want the film to end with the audience leaving with the feeling like everything worked out great. Here, Santa's bloody ruthless. He literally has the ability to grant unlimited animals the ability to talk for seemingly an unlimited amount of time, given that Billy ends up being able to talk in perpetuity. So why does he decide that Annabelle, who's acted purely selflessly in all this, should be forced to abide to the agreement that she made when she was 1 year old? Feels like a bit of an own goal on the scriptwriters, because if you'd had Santa grant Annabelle the ability to talk as a reward for a selfless act in helping Billy, not only do you give the feel-good factor to the audience, basically the vibe that everything worked out great, but you also open the film up to the possibility of sequels. By making Annabelle hold up her side of the bargain, all you're really doing is making Santa look like an arsehole for being as strict as he is for Annabelle's entire life. He could have left her a year and then given her voice back. He could have undone it right away, to be honest. He had the power and chose not to do it. And that, my friends, is why we must dismantle capitalism and put the workers in charge of talky talk powder distribution. One voice for the animals, of the animals. Rise! 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 And what on earth possessed the team to do the dystopic bad ending finale in which everyone we've just gotten to know over the last 50 minutes is dead or gone, and old lady Annabelle goes to die on a mountainside, become a reindeer, is just... I have no words, I really don't, and I really feel sorry for any kids who sat through this movie at Christmas because it's just such a bizarre, nonsense, quasi-downer ending, and not in a good way. Don't be fooled though, this really isn't a bizarrely bad movie that needs to be seen to be believed. What this is 40 minutes of slush, bland and overly complicated narrator-driven storytelling married up to 10 minutes of off-the-rails, out-of-left-field what-the-fuckery. The bulk of the film itself just doesn't do anything for me. The pacing's all over the place in the first 20 minutes or so, with it trying to ram so much plot and narrative threads in our direction as possible, and what follows from the fallout of that is about 20 minutes of whataboutery that feels more like a pot taken off the boil than a slow cook experience. There's just no spark outside of talking animals. Everything beyond that has been done much better in other animated kids specials to much greater critical acclaim. The dialogue itself is middling and by the by, which is understandable given the target audience, but it just lacks any kind of life, any kind of unique character moments or quips or single big hitter lines that make you actually remember this movie. Hell, I only watched this film about 12 hours before writing this review, and I'm still having to chronically go back through my notes. It's that kind of forgettable. Ask me in a month what I remember about Annabelles Wish and I'm likely to respond, oh, that movie with the mute boy where they end the film with a cow dying of old age on a mountain. And that's about it. Honestly, this script feels like it was a battle, with multiple teams arguing the case for multiple plot lines, and rather than a producer or director picking the best pitch and implementing it, they just decided, rather than upset any one team, that they'd just do all the plots suggested, and the result is a car crash of a Christmas special that, when it isn't being 50 Shades of pacing, is tonally all over the place. But I think I know why this film is as messy as it is. Want to hazard a guess at exactly how many people wrote Annabelles Wish? It's a 50-ish minute long animated kids movie that had a modest budget for 1997, so you'd think maybe 2, 3, or for the more critically minded thinkers out there, you'll be thinking, well, he's asking this question so it's going to be an obscene amount because he wouldn't be asking otherwise. And dear viewer, you'd be absolutely correct, because in a first for this channel and a new record setter, Annabelles Wish has the most scriptwriters for a film that I have ever seen, beating Alpha's Magical Christmas, which had 7 writers, by double. This short film had 14 writers, 15 if you factor in the author who wrote the original story. They didn't even have to write a plot, just convert it. This film wasn't written, it was committee designed. Outside of writers' rooms for sitcoms, I've never seen anything quite like this. And from what digging I've been able to do, I can't find any information on how this ended up happening. I'm not going to go through all 15 writers because, for the majority, this was their first and only credit, and the 1 or 2 notable ones who were involved would probably rather forget they made this. But they're all there on IMDb, and I double-checked the credits of the movie itself just in case this was an IMDb screw-up. But no, this thing's actually legitimate, and that's terrifying. On the direction front, we have Roy Wilson, whose biggest claim to fame is probably that he directed 16 episodes of Bonkers for Disney, but he also directed an unconfirmed number of episodes of the 2004 series Dragon's Rock. And that's about it. And, given Wilson's experience, I do have to say that while the script may be problematic, for a studio's first time attempt at an animated movie, oh yeah, this was the studio's first stab at doing this kind of thing, I actually think it's not too bad. Given I've covered Christmas specials produced by Film Roman at their peak, I'd say this was a more than worthy contender, at least at certain points. The animation is nice and fluid for the most part, shots change only really when they need to, and that pacing really helps to keep the film bubbling on when the script goes into freefall after the 20-minute mark. If I was being unkind, there are a couple of moments where the animation reminded me a little bit of the old Philips CDI games, and the art style used, while fine for the animals, for the most part, wasn't really my cup of tea when it came to animating human characteristics. I don't know, it just feels like they got different artists in on a scene-by-scene basis, because Billy in particular ends up looking completely different on an almost shot-by-shot basis at some points in this film. But, for a first attempt, I'd say chalk me down as impressed. Equally, it must be said that while the dialogue itself is rather lackluster, the voice acting for the most part is pretty good and solid. And that's largely thanks to an all-star cast including Randy Travis, Jim Varney, Cloris Leachman, Rue McClanahan, Kath Soucie and Jerry Van Dyke amongst many, many more. This is a frankly star-studded affair for the time, and the combined skill and talent of all parties involved takes what in lesser hands would have been dismal dialogue and makes it more than tolerable. Without being too crass, you can't polish a turd, but these guys and gals have done a hell of a job in trying. Finally, the soundtrack, and stepping up to the plate is Steve Dorff, best known for his compositions on TV shows such as Growing Pains, Columbo and My Sister Sam, alongside film credits including Rocky IV, The Bodyguard and The Last Boy Scout. And here, he delivers an OST that is just pure Hallmark Christmas. Think of the warmest, most inviting, sumptuous orchestral scores you could envision for a Christmas film, and Dorff's laying it down here with an effortlessness that's just a pure delight to hear. It's pure cut Christmas at its finest, and probably the single best thing about this entire movie. Also, as mentioned, this film does have some dedicated musical numbers written and performed by Randy Travis and Alison Krauss, amongst a couple of other participants. I know both Travis and Krauss have their own dedicated followings, my partner in particular is quite partial to Krauss, but honestly, I could never see the appeal. I like country music, but they just don't do it for me. And here it sounds like generic country in the middle of a Christmas movie. So in this instance, I'm going all in on Dorff. Annabelles Wish was created by Ralph Edwards Films and released direct to video and DVD in the UK in November 1997 by Carlton. In the US, it had an incredibly limited run in theatres at the tail end of October 1997, after which it too was also released on video and DVD by Hallmark in November 1997. And I kind of feel bad about giving this film a bit of a pasting in hindsight because, well, when they released this film, they made a deal with the Make-A-Wish Foundation in the US and the Great Ormond Street Hospital in the UK to donate a portion of their video and DVD sales to help support the charities. Going so far as to invite large amounts of the Make-A-Wish children in the States to a special advanced screening, complete with complimentary inflatable reindeer horns and a trip to Santa's grotto following the screening. Anyway, the film's currently on Amazon Prime Video and hasn't been re-released since that initial run in the 90s, so it's out of print physically, but there's tons of copies floating around and it's dirt cheap to come by. So, it's there if you want it. Annabelles Wish was a problematic feature. When your choice is to pick your poison between a rush job that ends up going off the boil or something that'll have you reaching for the vodka, you know you're in for a rough ride. While some decent voice acting, a high quality score and some decent animation does ultimately save this film from being an atrocity, it's not enough to outright save it, and as such, in my opinion, it just ends up drifting aimlessly into the middle ground of meh filmmaking, occasionally getting spikes of nope thrown in for good measure. Definitely not an essential watch. I can't recommend you show your kids this one. It may have its moments, but it's honestly not worth the headache and depression that it'll cause you.